Welcome back to the Centered on Buffalo podcast. This week's guest is Joe Marino. He's the host of Locked On Bills, which is one of my favorite podcasts to follow weekly. He does a great job every single week getting me prepped for the broadcast. And so I'm excited to have Joe on this podcast. You can also find out everything he's doing at thejoemarino.com. He's got a great Substack, and I think he's one of the best out there at covering the Bills and the NFL in general. So this will be a fun episode talking about how the Bills get back on track after the bye week and what they look like and how they're projecting moving forward. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe to the podcast, comment who you want to see coming up on the podcast, and give us some feedback. We appreciate all the subscribers, all the weekly listeners out there. Enjoy the podcast and go Bills.
Hit us up on all social media at The Buffalo Pod.
Joe, welcome back on the podcast, brother.
It's good to be back with you, Ewood. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure having you on. Heading down to Charlotte this week, your hometown, which maybe some that follow along with your podcast every week don't or I guess daily don't quite realize, but this is a true home game for you. But let's dig in on these Bills first before we get to this matchup against the Panthers, because they're coming out of the bye week. They start off 4-0, and now we're sitting at 4-2, and we're having much different conversations than we were having a couple weeks ago. But we saw some of these issues kind of coming to a head. Let's start on the offensive side of the football. Where do you see their biggest issues on offense right now?
I think the last couple of weeks against Atlanta and New England, which is where the source of our frustrations are really rooted, I think they just got away from the stuff that they do best, which is leaning into their heavy personnel groupings, multiple backs, multiple tight ends on the field. And it's not that they didn't do those things. It's just that they weren't two-dimensional out of it to the level that I would personally like to see. And when you go back to both of those games, I got away from them a little bit early. You go back to New England and you have the unfortunate fumble from the exchange of Dawson Knox and Josh Allen. And then the next thing you know, you're down 2 scores. And I think they got away from, hey, we're going to put big people on the field. We're going to run it. We're going to throw it. They kind of chased the game script a little bit. And the same thing happened with Atlanta, where you blink and it's 21-7, and it felt like they chased it once again, where I don't think the Bills offense ever has to be in that type of mode where it suddenly becomes this 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers. That's just not what they do best, right? Their ability to create mismatches and conflicts for defense is those tight ends, those running backs, Josh Allen being able to orchestrate running the ball. You're always +1 in the run game when you have Josh Allen as your quarterback. You got this James Cook guy. You got these tight ends that can block. You have all these extra gaps. You should really be able to exploit things. And then the play action stuff out of heavy personnel groupings is something that I think is a big area where I just find meat to be left on the bone for this offense. I think they'll get back to basics. Sean McDermott's messaging has been pretty direct, and I'm excited to see what this offense has coming out of the bye.
Yeah, he said a couple times now that we've gotten too cute. And Sean's a defensive head coach, and go back to 2017, and people will pick at him saying, he wants to run the football too much. You got Josh Allen now in 2018. Let him develop. Okay, now he's the MVP, he's the star of the show, but it doesn't necessarily mean by putting heavy personnel on the field, by leaning into the run game, that you're trying to take Josh Allen out of it. On most plays, Josh has multiple options to get to different plays if the look presents itself. I mean, they take a deep shot out of heavy personnel in the first play of the game against Atlanta.
Yep.
I understand Palmer gets hurt, and he was likely going to be a big part of that game plan, but it doesn't necessarily mean you got to get out of the heavy personnel. I mean, think back to New England with Gronk and Hernandez. It didn't always look like inline tight formations with heavy personnel. You can kind of mix and match what those formations look like. And I agree with you on that. I think at this point of the season, that's the strength of the offense. Yes, you want to mix in different personnel groupings, keep the defense guessing, but I'm with you. And I got this stat from you. I used it on the roundtable prior to the Falcons game, talking about we only threw the ball out of heavy personnel twice against the Patriots. One was for 20, one was for 23. Learned that on the Locked On Bills podcast throughout the week. And so I'm with you. I think that's where this team needs to live. And that's not even necessarily like, oh, let's play this clock control game and all that.
Right.
Yes, it does help keep the defense off the field. But when you have Josh Allen, you don't necessarily want to minimize possessions and all that. It's just how I feel like we can get the ball moving best. When you look at the weapons on the outside, and they're taking a ton of heat for the lack of separation. And, the guy that probably gets the brunt of it is Keon Coleman. I went on One Bills Live this week and said, I feel like they can move him around to get him in better spots. I've heard you say it differently. What are your thoughts on Keon Coleman, kind of this, I say second half of the season, but this part of the season post bye? Do you want them to lean into him more, or is it different?
Well, I think that there's a path for Keon Coleman to be helpful for this offense. There's likable skills that he has. He has good ball skills and hands, and he's a unique athlete. Not that he's straight line explosive, but there's body control and there's some short area quickness that is appealing with him. But I don't see the appeal of him as a high volume player for this offense, where right now he leads the team in targets and he leads the team in snaps played at wide receiver by over 40 snaps. And I don't see the justification for that. And I think that he can help this team in the scramble drill. I think there are times where you can ask him to win a leverage battle on an in cut and you can hit him in stride. And I think those are ways that he can help the offense. But I think it's just too inefficient for it to be a leading part of your offense. And I just don't think that in a year and a half with Keon Coleman, whether it's been the results on the field or a couple of times that Sean McDermott's had to discipline him, where you say that really aligns with the idea that playing time is earned and opportunity is earned. And so I am hungry to see some other options in there. You love the first play of the game against Atlanta just like I did. They're in 22 personnel, 2 backs, 2 tight ends. Palmer's your lone receiver. You see the route, the way he was uncover, bend the stem back into the corner, get on his toes, to break inside. You just throw it out there and it's easy to complete that. And so I'm hungry for more of that, and I'm hungry for more of Keon Coleman in ways that makes more sense for his skill set to not take away from the efficiency of this offense.
No, I agree. And right now, I know they worked in training camp, and I'm sure they work in practice. They go to it during the game, but the back shoulder throws, this is not Aaron Rodgers to Jordy Nelson, where it's essentially an extended handoff on the outside. We've drawn 1 to 2 penalties on it, and I believe completed it once on the season. And that's just not efficient enough when you're talking about an offense that should be one of the elite offenses in the NFL. And they are. I mean, stats would tell you that. But right now, when you're looking at solutions on how this team gets to and wins a Super Bowl, that's got to be a more efficient. Keon's got to be a more efficient when he's out there. I'm with you 100% on that. Let's take a moment to hear from one of our podcast partners, and that's Dan-O's Seasoning. I worked with Dan Oliver, Dan-O himself, to create a bundle just for our listeners. So right now you can get my 6 favorite Dan-O seasonings in a bundle. That's the original, the Chipotle, the crunchy, the primo, the red pepper seasoning, and the spicy. And you can get all those for 15% off if you use the code EWOOD. So check out the link in the show notes or go to danoseasoning.com and get that offer. You will not regret it. Yum, yum, get you some. When you look at this defense, they're giving up 5.8 yards per carry right now. Worst rush defense in the NFL by a lot of measures. When you look at this defense, do you think this next part of the season, with guys coming back off suspension, potentially guys getting healthier, maybe some new guys playing out there, that this rush defense can improve?
Very hopeful. I think you look at this defensive tackle situation in particular, and 60% of the snaps played at defensive tackle have been either a rookie or a practice squad player.
Wow.
And I think there's been some good growth, especially from Deion Walker, with how he processes the run. I've had the opportunity to watch almost every Deion Walker snap with Jerry Ostrowski, former Bills offensive lineman.
Yep.
And it's been really revealing to go through that tape with him and for him to kind of show me, hey, he's got to step here. He's got to step quicker. His head's got to be here. Hands got to be out quicker. But the growth has been really good to just go on that journey throughout the season. But there still are times where, it's not quite on point. And you're talking about a single gap defense. If there's displacement, somebody's not in their gap, you get creased. And that's where you see a lot of these explosive runs happen against the Bills. And so I think when you have a guy like Larry Ogunjobi, who I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Kyle Williams is back on the Bills like that, I think we got to be careful there.
But Kyle's body couldn't hold up right now anyway.
No, so I think you would know that.
Everybody can give up that dream.
Probably had some good battles with him, I'm sure. But Larry Ogunjobi's seen inside zone. He's seen counter. He knows how to step and how to move and to be do his 111 to be in his gap. And certainly when he's been in an even front, single gap penetration style defense, that's when Larry's played his best football. And I'm excited to see how Michael Hoyt can acclimate and the scheme options that they can have with him as a guy that, they played a lot more base defense this year. They're 24% base defense, which is top half of the league. Imagine that. The Bills run 3 linebackers. Well, what if one of them was Michael Hoyt? And really, you walk him up as a Sam backer, you have 5-man fronts. And I think that could kind of help you in some ways. So I do think those players are very meaningful for normalizing some of the rotation. And then simultaneously, you have some younger players that are gaining some experience. And I think the good news is you do look at a lot of the players defensively, even in the back seven, they've been better players. They've shown you throughout their careers that they're better players than they are. So we got reinforcements. We got maybe some new scheme options. We have some players that are underperformed that certainly are capable of playing better. You hope that recipe can get this run defense on track, because otherwise it's going to be some challenging battles. And man, there's nothing worse than not being able to stop the run. It kind of snatches your soul. And hopefully the Bills can get that corrected so we don't have to deal with that down the stretch.
Absolutely. And it really takes your soul when you're not playing with a lead and teams can pour into that. And so that's where the game script has been terrible these last couple of weeks, where you fall behind and then teams can just continuously lean into that ground game. This is a team that's an undersized defense. I don't want to say they're only built to play from ahead, because that's not fully the case, but that's when this defense is going to play their best. I went back and looked it up. The 2006, the last Super Bowl won by a team with the worst rush defense in the league was the 2006 Colts. And they had the worst rush defense in the league. They played a little bit better in the playoffs, but that's a team with a very high-powered offense that had Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis on both sides rushing the passer. And so that team was built to get a lead and then rush the passer. I don't know that we have Freeney and Mathis out there, with Bosa and Rousseau and others, but it seems like that's how we're built. You mentioned regression from some players, and we're 6 games into the season. It's not a full sample size, but when you talk about guys like Christian Benford and Terrell Bernard and Taylor Rapp in particular, what's your explanation for seeing some of these guys not play at their highest level? And you could say, well, we have some new pieces around and they're not used to playing with them. And, Christian Benford doesn't have Rasul Douglas on the other side right now. So he's maybe getting targeted a little bit more, however it may be. What's your explanation for that regression?
Well, it is tough to explain. I wish I had something that I felt concrete about, but I think ultimately it comes down to this being a defense that's predicated on everyone doing their 111th. And not that that's special about the Bills defense. I think any defense, any offense is pretty much rooted in that. But as you've had chinks in the armor along the way, I think it takes away from your players playing to their peak performance. And I think there's a lot of trust that's involved with zone coverage and how you layer in space and pass things out. And it just doesn't look very connected or cohesive to me. I think back to the best Bills defenses that we've seen under Sean McDermott, and you've got a back seven that's Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano and Taron Johnson and prime Trey White and Poyer and Hyde, and it didn't matter whoever CB2 was. They were years of playing together. They've ran every coverage. They've seen every route combination. They knew what to do. And during that time, we just complained about the pass rush the whole time, right?
Right.
They can cover the pass. They can make plays. They just didn't get enough pass rush. And so I think you have guys that are in game 7, not year 7 of doing it together. And I think that takes away from your trust and confidence to play fast and free and do your best. And look, everyone knows that there's issues. And I'm sure when that's true, you have maybe a lack of ability to play free and you're maybe trying to do too much. I think about the long completion against Atlanta. It's 23 yards to Bijan Robinson. Trey White's playing cover 3. Trey White knows how to play cover 3. He knows where he's supposed to do. He's squeezing down on that seam route to Kyle Pitts because he probably didn't trust that the safety was going to carry it. So he cheats a little. The next thing you know, he's not where he's supposed to be, and Bijan Robinson gets 23 yards, and the Falcons go up by 10, and the game's over. So I just think you have this really bad formula of things not going right that's taking away from players playing their best football, and you're seeing a lot of free access out there on the field for opposing offenses.
Yeah, that makes sense. And on that Bijan catch, Bosa won very fast at the line of scrimmage. So if Penix got to hold that ball at all, it's a sack. Instead, it's a 23-yard gain. And that's where everything's correlative on defense, where one guy doesn't do his job. Well, maybe it could have been a sack, or we'll get to this penalties. The penalties have been untimely these last couple weeks. They started with really with the Saints, where we've been at an extremely high number. Over Sean McDermott's tenure with the Bills, we've been slightly above average in amount of penalties per game when you look across the league. But when you look at the issues that we're having with penalties right now, do you see when you're watching film it more be like just a matter of being more disciplined with your alignment pre-snap and technique post-snap, or what are you seeing with the amount of penalties we're getting right now?
Yeah, the pre-snap stuff is pretty frustrating, right? That's this fundamentals line up, right? You got to line up correctly, and that's taken away from big plays offensively and defensively, sacks and fumble recoveries on defense. And offensively, that New England game, they make a great play on offense and it's coming back, and now you're behind the sticks. And it's harder to do the stuff that we talked about earlier, being in
Yep.
big personnel and staying on schedule when you're in first and 20 or second and 15. And so I think that matters a ton. So I think the pre snap stuff is just, hey, focus in, do what you're supposed to do. But then it's like a lot of illegal contact, pass interference. And I think that speaks to just some of the limitations that exist with this team in coverage that has been pretty disappointing. I'll argue that a lot of these holds that they're calling on the offense are pretty ticky tack, man.
Yep.
They're pretty frustrating to see. I don't see a lot of defense there, especially when you reconcile that against the lack of holding calls that the Bills defense is able to draw. I would say those are pretty questionable, but pre-snap and then just it's a lot of coverage stuff where it's illegal contact or holding or DPI that speaks to the coverage issues that we've discussed and have been pretty obvious to see throughout the course of the year.
We had two holding calls early in the game against New England. It was classic old school New England. As soon as the ball goes by you, Belichick would teach them throw up your hands, torque your body. If you know you can't make the play, try and draw a flag. We used to literally coach this. As
Mm,
soon as a guy does that, we would just throw up our hands. He's not trying to make a play anymore. Like, look, here we are. We're not holding them on this play. And Vrabel's doing the same thing.
mm.
And it happened twice early in the game. Both times backed us up deep in our own end,
Yes.
and put us at second and 14, second and 15, to your point, where now it's extremely difficult to lean into the run game. And then you become one dimensional, and that's where you can get real creative with your blitzes and your pass rush and all that. So I'm seeing very similar things with those holding calls. Let's take a moment to hear from one of our podcast partners, and that's our good friends at Waterboy. As a former NFL player, I learned early on how crucial sodium is for performance. In a typical practice, the average NFL player, or even just your high school athlete, college athlete, can you lose 1,000 to 4,000 milligrams of sodium through their sweat. So, to prevent muscle cramping and help you recover faster, you need to turn to a great electrolyte supplement with a high quality sodium source. And that's why I use Waterboy. And at this point in life, it hasn't slowed down. And instead of playing football, I got plenty going on with playing golf and weekly pickleball games, announcing games. This helps me keep up with my friends, my family, and everything else going on. So go check them out at waterboy.com. And right now, when you order, you can get a free trial to try out some of their other flavors of this great product. All right, so Bills are traveling down to Carolina. It looks like Bryce Young's not going to play, and it's going to be Andy Dalton. We don't know that for a fact yet, but that's how it's trending. Who would you rather face for the Bills if you got a choice between Bryce Young and Andy Dalton?
Bryce Young,
Me too.
comfortably. I'd rather play Bryce Young. Andy Dalton is one of those quarterbacks that's going to come in and run the offense, right? He's seen this style of defense. He's going to know where to go with the football. Where Bryce Young, I just think there's a lot of limitations, whether it's the size or just a really modest physical profile overall in terms of arm strength and even athleticism. He's got some quickness to him, but he's not the type of dynamic athlete where you think just because of what he offers with athleticism, he's going to be able to extend plays and really make you pay. So I wanted the inexperienced quarterback. I mean, back when we had confidence in the Sean McDermott defenses, these are the quarterbacks that he would just make
Oh
look
yeah.
like they don't belong in the NFL. So I wanted to see the potential for that, where Andy Dalton I think he's going to be able to read the defense and go to the right spot with the ball. And so I would much rather face Bryce Young than Andy Dalton.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. All right. So when you look at this Panthers offense, Rico Dowdle's been hot since he was filling in for Chuba Hubbard. Besides him, what challenges does this Panthers offense bring to this Bills defense?
They've really found a good recipe running the ball. They're getting good displacement. They're getting a ton of yards after contact. They're getting explosive runs, and that's been a problem for the Bills on defense. And so they've been committed to it. I think they've figured out their formula, kind of in spite of their limitations at quarterback. The Panthers aren't 4-3 because their quarterback play is stellar. It's because of how they've run the football, how they've improved on defense, and then obviously some opportunistic moments in the passing game. So this is a really important game for the Bills defensively to be able to meet the moment and understand what they're going to need to come in and do is stop the run. But probably bigger than that is scoring, right? I think the biggest thing you got to do is get Carolina out of the game that they want to play. And the way that you do that is to score. And so I'm looking for this Bills offense to have a coming out party out of the bye. I mean, let's be honest. The Patriots scored 23. The Falcons scored 24. The Bills lost by 2 scores. It should never happen. I
Right.
think this is going to be a hungry Bills offense that's out to prove something. And then obviously you got Kansas City after that. But I think this is a game for Buffalo's offense where they remind us of what they're capable of doing.
I agree. So what challenges does this Panthers defense bring to this Bills offense to try and slow down that coming out party?
They got some tanks up front, man.
Oh,
Derek
yeah.
Brown's a good football player. A'Shawn Robinson, he knows what he's doing. They got Tershawn Wharton. Those are some stout players. And I love what they're doing with this Nick Scorton, their edge player that they drafted, a high second round pick, where he's kind of slashing through and they're moving him around. Kind of what I hope the Bills do with Michael Hoyt, to be honest with you. He's been really solid. JC Horn's an unbelievable corner. I think he had a couple interceptions last week, as a matter of fact. But it's about how they're able to kind of control things up front with their run defense, which was, dude, it was horrible last year. They gave up over 3,000 rushing yards last year. It's unbelievable. It's literally the worst run defense and the worst scoring defense in the history of the NFL. And credit to them, they stuck with Coach Jairo Avero, gave him some reinforcements, and that defense is night and day. And I think Derek Brown's a big part of that equation. But they don't have a lot of like twitchy speed guys with their front, but they have really stout physical players that own their space. And so I'm excited to see this Bills offensive line meet that. Bills have a big physical offensive line. They can introduce extra gaps and maybe challenge some of the lack of athleticism and get after them. But they got some tanks up front. They got some ball hawks in the back end, not to mention Trayvon Merrick, a big free agent addition that they made at safety. So a nice little recipe, but I think the Bills will have their opportunity to move the ball and score some points.
Let's take a moment to hear from one of our podcast partners, and that's Nugsacks Premium Bagged Reusable Ice. If you're tired of the melted ice, water-filled coolers, and the constant gas station runs to buy bagged ice for your tailgates, check out Nugsacks Reusable Ice at nugsacks.com. That's Nugsacks.com, and use code Buffalo to receive 10% off your first order. Grab your Nugsacks and chill. All right, so Bills Mafia always shows up well in Charlotte. Mentioned earlier, this is a home game for you. What are your plans this weekend?
I'm excited, Eric. There's a large contingency of Bills Mafia here in the Charlotte area. There's Bills backers bars all over the town, outskirts of town. It's a big deal. I can't go to the local grocery store with the Bills hat on and not hear 3 or 4 Go Bills. So there's a large contingency of fans that already live here. Not to mention, we know that there's going to be a lot of traveling. I think you're going to see one heck of a Bills Mafia takeover of Bank of America Stadium. You should see the resale costs on tickets of just. I feel like you're looking for tickets. You're like, am I going to the Super Bowl? This is crazy. Right. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, Panthers fans couldn't give away their tickets. Now, they started 0-2. Now they've won 4 out of 5 or whatever. So things have been a little bit more exciting. So bottom line, there's a lot going on. I'll be a part of an event on Saturday at 1:00 at the Waxhaw Tap House. Going to do a live Q&A and really just hang out. There's food, entertainment, drinks. We're going to have a lot of fun. So more details on that, just go to thejoemarino.com.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping to make it to that. I land about 1:45. I'm going to hope to get over to that. So I hope to see a bunch of Bills Mafia there. We're going to get to the rapid fire questions brought to you by Dano's Seasoning. Number 1, if you had one trade target for the Bills to go after before the November 4th trade deadline, who would it be?
Chris Olave, receiver Saints. I think there's too many problems on defense for them to fix everything right now. I think you got to go to that Colts mentality a little bit. The best thing you can do to help your defense is to score points on offense. I think the best thing they can do is add some receiver with verticality and ability to beat man coverage, which would be Chris Olave.
I agree. I think I'm with you on that as my number one trade target as well. And it appears that we could make that work to bring him in and not compromise our cap situation and all of that. All right, what are the best wings in Charlotte?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love can I give you two?
Yeah.
Taste of Buffalo and Huntersville is really, really good. And Bazante's. They have a couple of locations, including an uptown location. Both groups, roots in Buffalo. They're really there's a lot of good wings in Buffalo because of the amount of Bills backers bars. But Taste of Buffalo and Huntersville and Bazante's are my spots.
Okay, so if you're not getting wings in Charlotte and you're traveling into town for the game, what's one restaurant recommendation you're giving outside of the wing spots?
Yeah, I would want to point people towards barbecue. I think if you think Carolina is like, what do we have? It's probably barbecue. The spot is Midwood Smokehouse, multiple locations. Presidents go there and eat when they come to Charlotte. So go to the Midwood Smokehouse.
Okay, I'm gonna have to put that on my list for this weekend. All right, last one for me. Give me a prediction for the game this weekend.
Man, I'm starting to get excited. I don't know, just leaning into optimism about this Bills team, and they've been doubted a little bit, right? Everyone's talking about the Patriots. You feel like coming out of the bye, this is going to be a pretty inspired team. Not to mention, this is a Joe Brady revenge game, right? We
Yep,
saw Dennis Allen and the Bears, and that meant something to him against the Saints, right? Were you part of the Jim Schwartz game? I felt like that was a big
I
one.
was absolutely.
That felt big, right? A coordinator rematch. We saw Vrabel do his thing against the Titans. I think Joe Brady gets his turn as a little revenge opportunity. So I kind of like the Bills this week. I think they score in the 30s. I think they'll give up something around 20. So give me, I don't know, 33-21.
Okay, I like that. I like that. And refresh me on this. So Joe Brady was fired. Was it like 4 games into the season? It
Yeah.
was early, right?
Yeah. So the year before, of course, 2019 LSU, greatest for me. It's the greatest college football team I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And then he fast tracks. He's the offensive coordinator for the Panthers under Matt Rule. And that first year, I think he had 1,000 scrimmage yards from like the weirdest players ever, like Curtis Samuel, Mike Davis, Ted Ginn, and I don't know, somebody else that you'd be very surprised was part of it. And then 4 games in the next season, he gets let go. And they're rolling with Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback. It's like a mess. Personnel wise, he didn't have it. And it felt like someone's got to get fired. So it's going to be this guy. And then, of course, we know he latches on as the Bills quarterbacks coach and becomes the OC. But it was very much somebody's got to get fired, and they chose Joe Brady.
Joe Brady revenge game. I'm signing up for it. Joe, I can't thank you enough for the time. Hope to see you in Charlotte this weekend. Thank you as always, and keep crushing it out there. You honestly do such a good job every week. I said it in the intro, but you help me prepare for the broadcast each and every week. So I can't thank you enough for what you do every single day and every single week.
Well, I appreciate that, E. Wood. And the only downside for me being on this podcast today is I don't get to listen to one of your amazing player interviews that I love so much on a regular basis. So I'm glad to step in, but I do miss the player interviews and look forward to whatever you have next.
We'll get back to some more player interviews. It's a balance during the season. How much do I want to reach out? I bye week, give them some downtime last week, and then this week, I don't know. I wanted to get some like actual Bills talk in maybe bring some Bills fans back off the ledge a little bit with some refreshment. Here's how we can get it done post bye. So I figured you were a good one for that.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.